Dr. Wright back again for episode 5 in our Aeneid series, focusing on book 5 of the Aeneid. Now, I mentioned in class that this is probably the book that you can skim, and in fact, I'd almost say use this video as a replacement for actually reading through it. It's kind of like the sports pages part of the Aeneid um, with these funeral games. But the big themes and important stuff I want you to get out of book 5, I'm pretty much going to cover here. So, these are Trojan funeral games. They are celebrated for Aeneas' father Anchises, who had died in the chronology of the poem at the end of book 3, or about a year prior to the events here in book 5. It is meant to evoke a scene from the Iliad, book 23, the funeral games for Patroclus, the companion of Achilles. And those games, in and of themselves, are meant to evoke the eventual funeral games for Achilles, which are recollected at the end of the Odyssey in book 24. So I've mentioned a number of times that books 7 through 12 of the epic are primarily focused on evocations of Homer's Iliad, whereas the first half of the epic, 1 through 6, are focused on evocations of Homer's Odyssey. But here we begin to see that shift where the Iliad is breaking into the narrative of the Aeneid, into the Odyssey's territory, so to speak. But the games at these this event for Anchises are not quite the same ones that are at the funeral games for Patroclus. There is no ship race in the Iliad like there is here. There is a foot race in both. There is an archery match in both. And here we have a boxing contest. It's a wrestling contest in the Iliad. And finally, there's the so-called Troy game, or Lusus Troiae, which no one is ever really clear about what exactly it is. I tried to figure this out when I was in college. All we know is it has something to do with horses on parade. Some of the maneuvers apparently can be kind of quite complex. Augustus tried to have it as a tradition that the youth of Rome would kind of do this every year as a sort of what the French would call rite de passage, a rite of passage, initiation into adulthood. But enough of the noble youths were getting injured doing this that a kind of outcry arose, and he decided to scrap that idea. But that's one of the reasons it might be here in the Aeneid, as trying to sort of give an origin for this practice that Augustus is trying to bring back. So, let's talk about these games. The funeral games for Anchises of Vergil's Aeneid 5 has a parallel in Homer's Odyssey, and I've already told you what that parallel is. There's one in book 24, the funeral games of Achilles, but there's another one in book 8 of the Odyssey, Odysseus at the court of the Phaeacians, which we will talk about later in May. So the setting, Odysseus is in a foreign space. He's at the court of the Phaeacians, which is sort of in a fairyland in terms of Homeric geography. Likewise, Aeneas is in Sicily, not quite Italy, but it's not Troy either. The concern here is Odysseus's identity. At this time, he hasn't revealed who he is yet. He just seems to be some traveler who's washed up on shore. And it is the prelude to Odysseus recounting his adventures in books 9 through 12, just like Aeneas did in books 2 and 3. But here, in book 5, the Trojans are in Sicily, so halfway to Italy. It's Odysseus as an individual, because at this point in the epic his companions are dead, versus the Trojans, a community with Aeneas as leader. The concern is the community's identity. And just as we said that putting the Troy game into book 5 gives it a sort of etiology and origin for a modern Roman practice, modern to Augustus, the funeral games here And the ancestor cult that it presumes is also very important in Rome. And there are different religious holidays for that. Uh, Not to mention that some of these families would, in fact, especially the Julii, for example, derive their descent from some of these very characters, like Aeneas or some of his companions. So Odysseus is trying to prove himself against others, while the Trojans are proving themselves against themselves. So you often hear me talk about in Roman culture aristocratic competition. The Greek word for competition is agon. And so we can say that Greek society and especially Roman society are agonistic. But the difference here is Odysseus is trying to do it in an individualistic sense, while the Trojans and optimally the Romans are doing it as a way in a way that serves the entire community. And another way to put that is when it becomes more individualistic in the first century BC, when you have these series of military dynasts like Marius and Sulla, Pompey and Caesar, and Augustus, as much as you might try to deny it, Antony too, that's when the system breaks down. And it's the prelude here to the Trojans landing in Italy. As I said, it's halfway to Italy. And we also want to think where this story comes in the narrative of Vergil's Aeneid, right before kind of the hinge, the halfway point, versus its counterpart in Homer's Odyssey, and that it's at about the quarter-way point. So what I'm going to argue here is that the funeral games for Anchises are a moment in Vergil's Aeneid where a number of major issues that are important to this community of Trojan refugees, soon to be Proto-Romans, are played out. Because Vergil's Aeneid is so concerned with the trajectory of Roman history, and I've mentioned various examples of this over all these videos, these issues are necessarily also important for Vergil's contemporary Trojans, the Romans. So, with this in mind, let's think about some values we might see played out in Vergil's fifth book of the Aeneid. We're going to look at 5 major events in the funeral games in order to determine what they can tell us about this community of Trojans and what they consider important. So we'll start with the ship race. 4 ships entered the first contest, well matched in oarage, the pride of the fleet. The swift Leviathan was captured by Menestheus, namesake of the Italian clan of Memmius. Major family, Memmius was the patron of a predecessor poet to Vergil, Lucretius. Gaius commanded the huge Chimera, a trireme the size of a city, rowed by Dardanian, another word for Trojan, youths sweeping their oars in 3-ordered tiers and propelling her on. Sergestus, namesake of the house of Sergius. Now this is a tricky one because for Vergil's readers, the most famous example of the Sergii clan, even though it is a patrician family, was Catiline in his famous conspiracy that Cicero suppressed in 63, the year Augustus was born. In fact, Augustus was born as Cicero was beginning to take steps to suppress that conspiracy. And Catiline will reappear in Book 8 on the shield in hell. And so Sergestus rode in the great Centaur. In Scylla, a sea-blue vessel carried Cloanthus, whence your family, Roman Cloentius, another family. Cicero defended a member of this family in an extant speech, the Pro Cloentio. Now, Scylla is also a tricky mythological reference because there's 2. We will see a Scylla in the Odyssey, this monstrous beast. The top is of woman and the bottom is made out of dogs, and she kills a number of Odysseus' sailors. It's one of these last monsters he has to get past in the narrative of his own adventures. There's another Scylla that we might see in Ovid in the Metamorphosis, who her city is being besieged. I believe it's by King Minos of Crete, but her father has this special purple lock of hair, and as long as he has that hair, the city will be protected. But his daughter Scylla falls in love with King Minos, and so she cuts off the lock of her father's hair, brings it to Minos, so the city falls. But Minos, rather than being like, all right, let's get married, is horrified by this betrayal, almost a parasital one. And in some versions, she sort of like lashed to the front of his ship, almost like a. Um, I know it's not a hood ornament. I can't remember the name of it right now. You know what I mean? Um, or sometimes they try to merge the two together that she becomes the monstrous Scylla. So it's a somewhat uncomfortable reference here, just like uh, Sergius. So we've got three major families: Memmius, Sergius, and Cluentius. And then there's also Gaius, who doesn't have a modern um, Roman familial clan descended from him. And here's how it ends up. Cloanthus wins in first, Menestheus second, Sergestus third, and Gaius in fourth place. And let's take a look at why it ends up happening this way. Gaius, the fourth place, is young, brash, loses because he takes the helm and refuses to listen to his crew. So here, in this context, this kind of individualism is ultimately destructive. Sergestus takes too big a risk, which isn't necessarily a bad thing to the Romans, but here it doesn't work out for him and crashes his ship. Menestheus gives a grand speech about his past achievements, but it doesn't really help him here. Cloanthus, though, prays to the gods. In the end, piety, and remember this is an important value in the Aeneid, and it covers not just what, when we think of a pious person, we think of in relationship to God, but while that is included in pietas for the Romans, it also is to duty towards other family members. So Aeneas carrying his father Anchises out of Troy to Italy, well, almost Italy, is reproduced in art from the Roman period well into our modern period. So piety towards the gods, age, and temperance ultimately win the day here. So pietas, this dutiful conduct towards an appropriate recipient, is the value that's particularly highlighted here, as it is in many ways throughout the epic, where it's often contrasted with furor. We'll keep playing with that as the epic goes on. So in the foot race, we've got these contestants. Euryalus stood out for his youthful beauty, Nisus for his pure love for the boy, and then there's also Diores, Salius, Patron, Helymus, and Panopes, and many more whose name oblivion hides. Euryalus takes first place, Diores third, Helymus second place. These are top three. But Salius, when it's all over, protested loud and long before the spectators, filling the ears of the elders in front with his complaints that he had been cheated and robbed of his prize. Then Father Aeneas, your prizes are fixed, and no one will change the finishing order. But I do have a consolation prize for our friend who did not deserve a fall. And he presented the hide of a Gaetulian lion to Salius, a huge shaggy skin with golden claws. Now, what happened here? See how I've highlighted Euryalus stood out for his youthful beauty, and Nisus for his pure love for the boy. So we have here a homoerotic, even pederastic, relationship. And these two characters are going to pop up again in later on in the Aeneid, in a passage that has a maybe unfortunate modern quotation. So Nisus slips and falls, which is an event that also happens in the foot race in the Iliad. But where Vergil differs is that Nisus sees a chance to still allow Euryalus to get into first place, even though Salius is threatening to overtake him. So Nisus makes Salius trip so that Euryalus can win. So now Nisus interrupts. If the losers are to get these great prizes and you feel so sorry for falls, what about me, Nisus? I would have won if I had not had the same bad luck as Salius. As he spoke, he displayed his face and arms, filthy with muck. Aeneas, like a good father, smiled at Nisus and had a shield brought to him, the work of Didymaion, a shield the Danaans had removed from the door of Neptune's temple, now a splendid prize for this noble youth. Aeneas like a good father. Aeneas is now pater and a fair judge, and it's appropriate now that he's growing into this role at the funeral games for his father. If you remember going through books 2 and 3, even though Aeneas is our focalized character because he is the narrator, he is markedly not really the leader as long as his father is alive. For the big decisions, he defers to his father for two reasons. One, his father is an interpret of the God's will, and also because he's his father. This is another element, as I've said, of Roman pietas that's expected of all good Romans. It's the pietas towards his adoptive father, Caesar, that Augustus claimed made him take vengeance as an ultor against Brutus and Cassius and the tyrannicides. But part of the development of Aeneas becoming a good father is not just Anchises dying, but Aeneas, again, the pietas towards the future Romans, which is what drives him to leave Carthage and Dido behind. So we move on to the boxing match. We have two contestants, Dares and Entellus. Dares is young, bold, and strong. Entellus is old, slow, and experienced. Father Aeneas did not allow Entellus to pursue his bitter rage any further, because Dares gets up and he boasts. Entellus is reluctant to go into battle, but he's convinced. And then, inspired by the gods, he beats the ever-loving shit out of Dares, to the point where it's like, you've got to stop. He stopped the fight, Aeneas did, took Dares aside, and spoke to him these soothing words. What happened out there? Didn't you sense that powers had shifted? Yield to the gods. So Dares realizes that all his boasting won't help. In this sense, Dares resembles Menestheus, we saw earlier in the ship race, who is happy to boast about his past achievements, but doesn't get him anywhere. Entellus has past achievements, but he keeps quiet about them until he's really provoked into fighting. Aeneas, too, if we go back to the Iliad, will know a thing or two about being in a battle against someone inspired by the gods. After Athena basically gives Diomedes in Iliad 5 the power-up star from Mario Brothers, he ends up fighting Aeneas. Doesn't go well for Aeneas, has to be saved by his mom, Venus, or Aphrodite, in the Iliad. And so he realizes, no, you know when it's time to give up. So yielding to the gods can also be reframed as prudentia and pietas. God is born in Trojans all. This is Entellus speaking now. God is born as Aeneas. Observe the strength I had when I was young, and the kind of death you saved Dares from. He spoke, then stood facing the ox that was his prize, and lifting his right hand, poised the hardened glove high between its horns, struck and crushed its skull. So he just punches this cow in the face and kills it. But then everybody gets barbecued. All right, so we move on to the archery contest. Our contestants, Hippocoon, Menestheus, remember him, Eurytion, and Acestes. Acestes is a Trojan, yes, but he's already been on Sicily anyway, so he's another Trojan who survives but doesn't quite make it all the way to Italy, but he makes it further than Andromache and Helenus. So the idea, they take a dove, they tie it to a cord around a mast, and the person who hits the dove wins. Is this a cruel contest? Yep. So, Hippocoon just hits the mast. He's out. Menestheus hits the cord. Now the dove is free. But Eurytion is so good he's able to hit the dove, so he wins. And what about Acestes? Only Acestes was left. He had no chance for the prize. Eurytion already killed the dove. But he shot an arrow nonetheless, high into the air, the old patriarch displaying his skill in his sounding bow. Then a sudden marvel appeared. We've had a number of these in the Aeneid. There'll be the ships later on in this book turned into sea nymphs who will reappear later on in the Aeneid. When Juno tries to drive the Trojan women to burn them so that they don't get to Italy. The Harpies and their awful prophecy that the Trojans will be so hungry they eat their tables. which will get fulfilled in a much more anodyne way later on in the epic. But it is an important theme, and this is important in Book 6 as well. How do you interpret what the gods really want? Remember, Aeneas, knowing that the gods have said you have to go to where the Trojans are from, okay, there's some Mount Ida here in Troy, there's one in Crete, so we'll go there. That must be where the Trojans are from. And that's the first of a number of settlements where Aeneas fucks up, things go wrong, because he's not going where he's really supposed to go, Italy. So portents and trying to interpret the gods' will are important in the Aeneid, just as they are in Roman life. A mystic portent for days to come, when seers chanted to late-filled omens, for as the arrow flew through the wispy clouds, it caught fire, and marked its trail with flames, until it was consumed in the thin upper air, like a star that had come unfixed from heaven and flies across the sky with long streaming hair. Comet comes from the Greek coma, which is also homophonous with the word in Greek for hair. So Ovid makes a pun out of this at the end of the Metamorphoses. In 44-43, when Octavian is trying to, emphasize that he's the heir of Caesar, a comet appears in the sky, which was taken as a great omen, not necessarily a good one. The Etruscan seers said it heralded the end of an age. But others said, and this is the story that Ovid picks up at the end of Metamorphoses, it's the soul of Caesar going to heaven and becoming a god. So there is a temple to Julius Caesar still in the Forum. You saw it in the Mary Beard video. And this comet appears on a lot of coinage of Octavian, on certain early images of him as well. So this is what Vergil is referencing here. And so the hair is also the same kind of pun on the Greek that Ovid will do. So Acestes, this Trojan, he gets this portent. All right, now the parade is a choreographed display of communal skill that involves horse riding events for the noble youth, here led by Iulus, sometimes called Ascanius. So this is your link to the Julian gens, who is the son of Aeneas. It's not a contest, although it does involve a simulated battle. Then they performed other maneuvers, attacks and counterattacks mirroring each other, weaving in and out of circular patterns, fighting mock battles in full battle gear, retreating, attacking, and then calling a truce. You can see where people get hurt here. And riding along side by side. The labyrinth in lofty Crete is said to have been a route woven within blind walls, a maze with 1,000 irretraceable paths, designed to foil any map for escape. Those of you who don't remember the myth. So one day, a really beautiful bull washed up on the shore of Crete. And King Minos, remember him from the Scylla story, was advised that he should sacrifice it to Poseidon. So what is basically, Poseidon produced this beautiful bull so that it could be sacrificed to him. But because it's such a beautiful bull, Minos says, no, I'm going to keep it. So he lets it loose in meadows up in the mountains. The gods are now angry at this, so Aphrodite incites this love into pacify Minos' queen for the cow, for the bull. She gets Daedalus, the great craftsman, to build her a cow costume, basically, so that she can get it on with the bull, and it works. And that's where the Minotaur comes from. So now Minos, who then sacrifices the bull, having been taught an awful lesson, but what is he going to do with the Minotaur? So he turns to Daedalus again, who designs the labyrinth to imprison the Minotaur, who then feeds on 14 young Athenians every 5 years. Now, Daedalus eventually got sick of doing this, and so he flees from Crete, and with his son Icarus, with the wings flying too close to the sun and all that. Although Icarus doesn't survive the journey, Daedalus does, and will make his way to Italy, and we'll see a reference to that again in Book 6. So too the patterns the sons of the Trojan wove are like this labyrinth. The tradition of this equestrian display in these mock battles was first revived by Ascanius, who taught the native Latins how to perform them when he built the walls of Alba Longa. The Albans taught their sons to do as Ascanius and the Trojans had done when they were boys. In the course of time, great Rome itself received and preserved this ancestral tradition. It is now called Troy, and the boys are called the Trojan troop. So Aeneas founds Lavinium with named after his new wife Lavinia. The whole war is fought over in 7 through 12. And then Ascanius founds Alba Longa. Romulus and Remus are descended from the royal family of Alba Longa, but after they return their grandfather to the throne, they themselves go on to found their own city, Rome. Okay. So what values do we think are important to the community as we've seen in this passage? We've talked about piety with Cloanthus, Entellus, and Acestes, who gets that omen. History, the ship race with all these Roman ancestors, and also the Troy game, the tradition going down from the Trojans to Lavinium to Alba Longa to Rome, to Augustus. And how Aeneas grows into his role as father of his people and mediator, leader of his people. The title father of his country was one that was given to outstanding Roman. Cicero was acclaimed it for defeating the Catilinarian conspiracy in 63. And Augustus will also get this acclamation, but not until 2 BC, long after Vergil has died. But it's something that it's clear he had wanted for a while. So we can say that Book 5 poses a set of scenarios for us to observe the defining characteristics of this community, and by extension, the community that traces its lineage back to it, that is, the Romans. And then it affirms the link between past and present as Aeneas is brought to observe the future of his people in Book 6. And that's what we're going to talk about in our next episode. So, again, this I think can really substitute for reading Book 5 of the Aeneid. It's one that it is a little bit harder to get into, but these are the big themes we want to get out of it. Book 6, on the other hand, we're going to take a much closer look at, because Book 6 is the hinge of the whole epic. It's the halfway point, and it's when Aeneas gets a sense of the future of Roman history, the future for him, and the stakes of what he is doing. And he'll get a similar scene in Book 8, but the difference is in Book 8 with the shield, we, the readers, and Vergil's audience understand it with our knowledge of Roman history, but Vergil expressly says that Aeneas doesn't. He doesn't have anyone interpreting it for him like his father will in the underworld in Book 6. Okay, so stay tuned for Book 6 of the Aeneid, and have a great week.